So, hi everyone, I'm Mathieu Nancel and I'm going to present you a project that I did with Mingyu and Vogel at University of Waterloo. So, this is a large display. Interaction at a distance with one of these often relies on gestural input, which has several drawbacks. First, input movements often need to be somewhat wide in order to be accurately detected, at least by external sensors, which means that the user needs a large empty space around him, and which prevents him from interacting too close to the display. And this is even more of a problem with tactile displays. Second, these wide movements can quickly become tiring, as well as sometimes socially awkward. And finally, occlusion can occur when something gets bigger, something gets between the user or a part of the user and the sensor. The occlusion can come from the user himself, or from another user working nearby in collaborative situations. In this project, we focused on subtlety as a solution for these issues. We designed a system that should be as expressive as possible, while allowing discrete and hopefully non-tiring input. As for its design, we took our inspiration in one of the most subtle forms of expression that we could think of, that is hand postures. We designed Gunslinger, a bimanual input technique that works at a distance and that is controlled arms down. We mounted 3D sensors, in our case leap motion devices, at the top of the user's thighs, which allows fine hand tracking within a small range. This way the chances of occlusion are minimal and users are less likely to disturb each other even when they stand close. So first I'm going to show you a brief video to illustrate this, the operating range of Gunslinger at a distance, and how it can be replaced by touch depending on the user's needs for visual details. So Gunslinger works this way. Commands or modes are activated with hand postures. Continuous input, such as parameter control or pointing, is controlled with hand or finger movements. And thanks to its small operating range, Gunslinger can be mixed with touch even when close to the display. For instance, a quasi-mode can be set arms down while touch is used for convenience. Gunslinger is designed to be as expressive as touch. This way users can choose where they stand relative to the display, depending on the level of details that they wish to observe, rather than the functionalities that are available at a given distance. We designed the cursor of Gunslinger to provide continuous feedback on the currently recognized state of the system, so that users don't need to look at their hands when something goes wrong. First, the outside of the cursor shows the recognized posture using discrete bumps. Raised fingers are represented as inflated bumps, and fingers tucked in as flat bumps. We also define 3 positions for the thumb. It can be either stretched out, away from the digits, aligned with the palm, or tucked in. Also, in bimanual use of Gunslinger, the cursor for each hand can be easily disambiguated visually, simply by looking at the side of the thumb bumps. This gives up to 48 postures per hand. We also developed a specific recognition algorithm for this device and vocabulary that I will not detail in this presentation. So, when developing an application using Gunslinger as an input method, we associate commands or modes to hand postures. So in order to help the user further, we also represent the currently active command or mode using glyphs at the center of the cursor. For instance, here are the 3 visual feedbacks for a pointing task, that is pointing, clutching, and pressing. Every posture, every possible posture that is not featured in the current vocabulary is assigned the neutral state that pretty much does nothing. So here's a quick video of how it looks when in use. So you have the bumps reacting to users' hand posture changes. An example of pointing with the various states that it affords. This is clutching. And this is pressing. Also, the ring offsets from the center as the hand approaches the tracking boundaries and begins to fade away as tracking becomes less reliable. This fading corresponds to the outer boundaries of an artificially limited sensing range. Otherwise, users cannot know in advance when they are about to leave the sensing range of the 3D cursor, of the 3D sensor. We did this to encourage users to stay in that range and to adopt a relaxed posture. Commands with Gunslinger are triggered with the Commands are triggered with the same hand with Gunslinger and with touch in order to minimize learning effort. Knowing which hand is forming postures is trivial with Gunslinger since we have a right and a left sensor. However, which hand is touching the display is not an information that's usually available with touch. So we designed a state machine that guesses which hand is touching the display based on touch events and hands detection. Its principle is detailed in the paper. For example, in this video, purple represents a left touch and blue represents a right touch. The state machine makes sensible decisions based on these various events that I mentioned that are easily correctable. Notice how the color change on the left, if you can. Simply by swiping, so you can correct a wrong guess simply by swiping your hand past the thigh on the opposite side. We created an interaction vocabulary for a map application that combines Gunslinger and touch input. It's designed for high coherence between touch and Gunslinger commands, and all functionality can be achieved with either modality. For example, pointing is done with the right index finger for Gunslinger and with one touch from the right hand. The context menu is opened with the right index and middle fingers on Gunslinger and with 2 right touches. Panning is controlled with the left index finger with Gunslinger and with 1 left touch. Zooming is controlled with the left index and middle fingers on Gunslinger and with 2 left touches. And finally, the global menu is opened with the index, middle finger, and thumb on Gunslinger and with 3 left touches. So we ran a 4-part study to evaluate various aspects of the usability of Gunslinger. Aspects that are the Midas Touch effect, the effectiveness of our recognition algorithm, arms down pointing performance, and general usability. For Midas Touch, we wanted to check how often our arms down form factor triggered unwanted commands. After all, the location of the sensors could mean that any arms down posture could trigger commands. So we faked an extra long preliminary interview at the beginning of the study with a lot of open questions while participants were already wearing the sensors. The idea was that participants should not think too much about the device and just gesture as they normally would in a conversation. We found that hands were undetected 90% of the time. So participants were seldom standing with their arms idly to the sides, which is good news for us. The postures to which we did not assign a function were recognized 3% of the time. And finally, postures from our vocabulary were recognized about 6% of the time, which is actually not too bad for users untrained and unaware of the technique at this point. By adjusting the thresholds in our recognition algorithm, we could reduce this down to 0.7% of the time. Second, we tested the effectiveness of our recognition algorithm and how well our cursor feedback assisted posture formation. Participants were asked to hold one of 20 hand postures, 3 times each, first with real-time feedback in the form of a hand cursor, and then without feedback. With visual feedback, the average recognition time was about 1.3 seconds for the fastest postures and higher than 2.5 seconds for the slowest. Note that these numbers include reaction time. Participants were faster without visual feedback, but at the cost of some recognition failures, mostly for postures involving 3 fingers or the pinky finger. And we turned this finding into design guidelines. Note also that this is a worst-case scenario with non-expert users. Third, we evaluated the performance of arms-down pointing. We followed a typical fit study protocol with indexes of difficulty ranging from 1.7 to 5.2 bits. The acceleration function was calibrated specifically for this setup. So quickly, we observed reasonable, if improvable, error rates, considering the novelty of the technique. And we also showed that arms-down pointing followed Fitts law, which is always interesting to know. And finally, we evaluated the whole system for general usability and preference. Our map application allows basic operations such as panning and zooming, dropping pins, calculating itineraries and, between them, and basic undo-redo commands. Participants were first asked to perform specific tasks such as dropping 3 pins or calculating an itinerary, and with 3 modalities. Bimanual Gunslinger, presented on the left, bimanual touch on the right, and a mix of both, where the dominant hand touches the screen and the other one triggers general commands or modes with Gunslinger. After that, participants were assigned an open-ended task, namely planning a trip, a holiday trip, with any modality they wanted for each functionality they needed. We found that Gunslinger was generally slower than touch, which is not surprising. Touch is more familiar and has very high tracking quality. However, participants rated Gunslinger positively for speed, precision, fatigue, and general impression. In the open-ended task, Gunslinger alone was mostly used for saving and undo-redo actions, and marginally for navigation. The mixed condition was used for adding markers to the map and navigation. As for qualitative feedback, Gunslinger was found novel, especially compared to touch. It was also considered generally relaxing, advantageous at a distance, and even up close for high targets. The hand cursor was appreciated and considered adequate, if somewhat too sensible at times. We used this feedback to improve our recognition method after the study. Mixed was also mostly thought as a sensible idea, and participants agreed that it required practice. So to summarize, we proposed Gunslinger, which is an interaction technique that works arms down at a distance and that can be combined with touch input. It provides the same functionalities near and away from the display, leaving the user to decide where he wants to stand depending on his needs for visual details. Our initial study found it usable with acceptable performance while leaving room for improvement. Midas Touch was low, and our expectations of lower arms fatigue was met by participants' feedback, which validates our core design principles. Our future work will focus on improving our design with more precise hardware and recognition methods, and to explore uses of Gunslinger outside of large display environments. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for a great talk. I'm Rofi from University of Maryland, College Park, and I have a small question. I'm wondering whether Gunslinger allows users to walk while doing the arm-down interaction. And I'm wondering what will be the challenge if we allow users to walk in front of the large screen while doing the interaction? Yeah,
that's a very good question. I mean, if I'm guessing, and this probably showed up during the study, triggering commands probably works because this is only recognized or not recognized state, and this is not affected by the orientation of the sensor relative to the hand. Now, for continuous control, this would probably get a bit messy, at least in our current implementation. I mean, the sensor that we use for now, they do not know their own orientation or stuff, so we cannot really adapt to that. But that would definitely be something that we would add to a specific sensor that we would develop for Gunslinger in the future.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for your question.
We have time for another question. In the meantime, I'll ask one. So one of the things I find interesting about this approach is that in earlier work, you've seen that mid-air interaction is very tiring when you have your hands up. And so the idea that you can kind of keep your hands by your sides is very useful. Did you actually measure that in any way in terms of the fatigue and how they felt about it with respect to fatigue?
So no, I mean, we have a lot of user feedback about, I mean, we asked them to rate the few conditions we have for fatigue. So definitely mixed and Gunslinger won on that aspect. Now for you know, complete measures of fatigue with muscular strain and stuff, I mean, that would require a longer study, so we did not. But I mean, there are already a corpus of previous work that would tend to hint at the fact that yes, this is less tiring, and that really fits with what participants told us. Thank you.
All right, I have one. Oh yes, another question.
Yeah, hi. Sorry, Todd Barrett from Duke University. When you looked at this, did you also look at, let's say, like thigh touch pads or some alternative to an optical sensor versus some kind of haptic type device? Because I mean, I see like there could be advantages of one versus the other. And is one of the advantages of yours kind of like the gestures that the vocabulary you develop? So,
I mean, we did think about it. For what we're interested in and the kind of vocabularies that we're interested in, I mean, we clearly preferred the idea that we could actually have 3D movements, which turned useful depending on which functionalities was used, and also the fact that, well, it would have given us a lot of similarities between touch interaction and touch on your thigh, but the idea to be able to variate which finger is used. I mean, this is something that we were really interested in keeping. So we did not explore, you know, touch on the thighs, but that's definitely something that would be worth comparing or just exploring as an alternative. Yes.
Great, thanks.
Thank you very much.